In today's video, we will reflect on the Shadow series as well as the Enderverse saga written by Orson Scott Card, which are the backbone of the wider Enderverse. If you want to watch dedicated review videos for each of the individual novels, then feel free to browse the video description below. Granted, I should also mention that the Enderverse includes more novels than the 11 books in this video series. Most notably, Orson Scott Card added 2 prequel series related to the first and second Formic Wars, each consisting of 3 installments. Furthermore, A War of Gifts, published in 2007, as well as the still ongoing Fleet School series should be mentioned for completeness as well. Indeed, the Enderverse is quite expansive and also sports various short stories and graphic novels, which I will not cover in detail here. As you can imagine, it might be a bit intimidating for a new reader who wants to start reading the Enderverse to get an idea where to begin and how to proceed. I mean, just look at this graphic from the Enderverse Wikipedia page. Thus, in this video I want to specifically address potential choices for a reasonable reading order. Obviously there are more than one. Indeed, the first go-to reading order one would traditionally choose is the order of publication date of the novels. In this case, everything begins with Ender's Game, which, to be honest, is the case for any reasonable reading order. We then proceed with the 3 novels of the so-called Speaker trilogy, namely Speaker for the Dead, Xenocide and Children of the Mind, which tell a continuous storyline, albeit in the far future compared to Ender's Game. We then skip back in time to the beginning of the timeline with Ender's Shadow and the Shadow trilogy, consisting of Shadow of the Hegemon, Shadow Puppets and Shadow of the Giant, to then continue with Ender in Exile, Shadows in Flight and finally The Last Shadow. Overall, this reading order works relatively well, but it contains one major jump forward in time related to the Speaker trilogy and then again a major jump backwards in time to Ender in Exile, resulting in a somewhat disjointed storyline, if we are being honest. This brings up the second go-to reading order, which focuses on the chronological events of the 2 series. Again, we should begin with Ender's Game, followed by Ender's Shadow, which basically takes place at the same time, followed by the Shadow trilogy. Ender in Exile takes place in parallel and after the events of the Shadow trilogy, mainly due to time dilation effects, and thus should be read after the aforementioned Shadow trilogy, at least in my view. We can then make the big jump in time and start the Speaker trilogy. Again, we end up with a small conundrum since the plot in Shadows in Flight runs mostly parallel to the Speaker trilogy, once more due to time dilation issues. Nonetheless, I am of the opinion that Shadows in Flight and definitely The Last Shadow should be reserved on the last spots of your reading list. Frankly, this placement is helped by the fact that these are the 2 weakest novels anyway. In this chronological reading order, the time jumps are not as jarring, but we switch the protagonists around several times, which also happens in the publication order as well, to be fair. Another disadvantage of the chronological reading order is that you will be reading Ender's Shadow directly after Ender's Game, and it is up for debate whether this is a good idea. Orson Scott Card manages to tell the same events compellingly from 2 perspectives, 3 perspectives even if we include A War of Gifts, but it might be better to read other novels first before retreading the same plotlines. Thus, a hybrid reading order would be to start with the Ender's saga and finish with the Shadow series. I personally read these series in this hybrid configuration Ender's Saga by publication order followed by the Shadow series, also in publication order. In this example, we only change the protagonists once between the two series, but we still end up with the relatively substantial jump in time between Ender's Game, the Speaker Trilogy and Ender in Exile. In addition, Ender in Exile also feels quite isolated and like a quote-unquote dangling plotline in this case. One other option, and probably the best overall choice for a reading order, might be to start with the Ender's Saga, but this time in chronological order. Thus, one would follow Ender's Game directly with Ender in Exile and then afterwards make the jump to the Speaker Trilogy, only to follow then with the Shadow series. This way you would have the fewest changes in protagonists, and there is also a minimum of isolated plotlines and time jumps. Obviously there might be better options, specifically if you include all the short stories, graphic novels and the other prequels and ongoing book series that I mentioned at the very beginning. These are just suggestions specifically to help interested readers. Thus, none of the aforementioned reading orders are per se wrong or right, but they each have their own advantages and disadvantages. What do you think? Is there an ideal way to start and also proceed with the novels of the Enderverse? Let me know in the comments below. If you liked this video, you may also enjoy the other reviews and content on my channel. Feel free to leave a comment if you want to discuss the novels or if you want to suggest other books that I should review in the future. Please consider upvoting and subscribing, it is much appreciated. Thank you for watching and until next time.